Okay. I really want to talk a little bit about effective ways to interview when you're hiring for fundraisers or development staff in general, but I really mean a little bit more experienced fundraisers. One thing to remember is that fundraisers are excellent communicators, and you must go beyond canned responses if you want to really find out what differentiates one candidate from another. So if you ask very simple, traditional questions about their experiences with donors, every fundraiser I have ever met and interviewed always has a pretty good story to tell about their favorite donor they've ever worked on or the largest gift they've ever worked on. These are very basic questions that they are used to answering all the time. I think you need to go a little bit beyond that and really ask about how and the why when they start talking about their approach towards fundraising, because that's really the part that's important, and that's where people differ. For example, whenever you interview fundraisers, they will always tell you how important it is to build a relationship with their donors. So relationship building is something that's been hammered into their heads through multiple professional development opportunities and the literature in general. So that's something that every fundraiser feels strongly about, and they'll tell you about it in an interview. But very few fundraisers actually have a very good handle on how they build relationships and why they do it this way. So it's important to go beyond the simple question of or answer of, relationship building is really important, and find out how they go about building relationships, because that will also determine whether they're going to jive well with your donors or not. So for example, sometimes one way to build relationships with donors that interviews sometimes will mention is that they like to have a lot of frequent interactions and really understand where a person is coming from and their entire history. And that lends itself if you are if your organization where they will have opportunities and access to a lot of donors all the time so that they get to know them. But on the other hand, others tend to be a little bit more systematic in the way they approach building relationships. So they'll talk a little bit about establishing trust and delivering on promises and sort of managing it a little bit more like a project when it comes to delivering on the promises they make to donors. And that may lend itself well for a particular donor personality that you may be dealing with a little more than others. So it's important that you go beyond that. It's not so much about matching the perfect fundraising style with your donor base. It's more that you're hiring a fundraiser who has a self-awareness to understand what their style is. And then the other thing is you want to look for fundraisers who have worked on two consecutive gifts from the same donor. And believe it or not, that is very rare. It is very rare because we have a turnover and a retention issue in our industry. So it's quite common for fundraisers to stay in a particular role for about a year to 18 months, work on one gift from a donor, and never see them again. And that's okay. That shows that they're able to close gifts, but it doesn't show you what they're able to sort of strategize and go beyond that and worry about the next gift, which is really important when it comes to maximizing fundraising results, because it's not the first gift, it's the largest usually. So look for donors who have had or for development officers who have had longevity with donors who've given more than one gift over a span of time. The other thing to consider is how they're going to build relationships with internal staff is just as important as to how they're going to build relationships with donors. I know that we're hiring these folks to be a frontline facing and to interact with donors outside of our organization, but sometimes the most effective fundraisers are those that are able to build strong relationships inside the organization so that they can line up all the ducks in order to present appealing opportunities to donors and take advantage of the donors' interests. So it's important that you ask them how they go about establishing relationships internally, particularly if they're going to be in a leadership position or the role has a significant amount of interaction with senior leaders. That's a very important question to ask. And don't discount the phone interview. I know that we're fairly comfortable with Zoom and video calls in general, and they're great. But sometimes it can also be a little bit distracting, and you can get a lot of substance when you're just talking to someone, and when they don't have the props of being comfortable or feeling like they're presenting because they're in front of a camera, and you're just relying on hearing what they have to say. Sometimes you can get a little bit more insight that way. So definitely utilize the phone where appropriate. And then I would strongly encourage you to balance the projects and assignments with the stage of the interview. I think increasingly in our industry, we're seeing a trend towards practical application of skills rather than interviews, traditional question and answer interviews, which is a good thing, but it's very time consuming and stressful for applicants. And if you do this as a blanket rule for early stage interviews, a lot of people will get very disappointed, and sort of it will leave a bad taste in their mouth. And many times, the fundraising professionals that I talk to feel like they're asked to do these things in order to do for the organization to generate ideas without having to pay them for their time. So it's important that you only ask these kinds of assignment based presentations or writing assignments, etc., at the very last stage of the interview where you're looking to choose between one or two candidates, for example. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about when to consider using a recruiting firm if you are thinking about some of the challenges you may have had with recruiting talented fundraising development staff. And here's the advice that I can give you. Um, Think about using a recruitment firm when you do not have the time and resources to dedicate to the recruitment process. It's really important that you take the recruitment process seriously. It's not something you want to do off the side of your desk. And I know we're all very busy. So you need to be honest with yourself. And if you're not in a position, in a frame of mind where you're able to dedicate the time and resources to manage the process end to end, which means you need to review applicants with some urgency. You need to get back to applicants and provide frequent updates and manage the process in a reasonable time frame. If you're not able to do that and you don't have the bandwidth, it's good sometimes to use a talent recruitment firm that can streamline that process and save you a lot of time as well. Another time when you want to consider using a recruiting firm is when you've not attracted the right kinds of candidates in the past. That can be due to many things, and when you work with a recruitment firm, they will try to figure out why that is the case. Sometimes it's because your organization doesn't have brand recognition. Sometimes it's because it has a different brand reputation than what you think it should. Sometimes it's because you're just not presenting the job description may not be appealing enough. So it could be any number of things. This is where a recruiting firm is helpful because they engage with candidates one-on-one and they're able to provide them with much more information about a potential job and also answer any questions before someone considers even applying for a role. And increasingly today, if a candidate has a question about a particular job or some aspect of it, it feels like there's no one to answer it for them. So it's important that you consider that availability when you are thinking about whether to use a recruiting firm or do it yourself. And then when you need a very specific combination of skills and experience, this is also where recruiting firms are helpful because they're very good at finding the needle in the haystack. So if you're looking for something specific, they're quite motivated and able to find that specific combination of skills a little bit proactively rather than you having to sift through a ton of resumes and just realizing that it's not working. I think the most important thing I can stress is that when you have a vacancy on your fundraising team, you're losing money because on average, it costs about $70,000 in lost fundraising revenue every time you have to replace a high performing fundraiser. So the longer that position stays vacant, the bigger that number grows. So it's important that you handle the replacement of your senior fundraisers in an efficient way so that they can be back out there raising money for your organization and they can be closer to achieving the mission of your organization. So the money that you would spend on a recruiting firm sometimes will be money that will more than pay for itself in a way of increased revenue in a both shorter term time frame and also more revenue long term. And now I'm going to close up with talking a little bit about the future skills you want to hire for today that I think are going to be really important in a post-pandemic world. You're already seeing some of those skills bubble up to the top even before COVID-19, but I think this is going to be something to look out for. The first one is resilience. I think that the ability to deal with failure and the ability to deal with ambiguity is going to be really important in both the short and the long term. So finding staff that's able to recover well and sort of bounce back quickly with difficulties and when they're experiencing roadblocks is going to be a really important skill to look for. Innovation and entrepreneurship, kind of both in that same boat, where our entire industry is due for a disruption to begin with, and having candidates who are not afraid to try new things, I think is going to be really important. Emotional intelligence, particularly in leaders, is going to be very big in the next 5 to 10 years. Data literacy and digital communications is one skill that we were seeing emerging even before COVID-19, and now it's just has exploded. And I personally am very worried that our industry does not have the talent pipeline depth in this particular field, and we cannot compete with the for-profit sector that's already not only light years ahead of us, but also able to compensate quite well in this particular space. So that is one area that's going to be very competitive, and it's going to be very difficult to recruit for in the next little while. And then strategic partnerships and collaboration is another area. And what I mean by that is increasingly our donors are becoming very savvy, and they realize that a lot of the problems that they're looking to address through their philanthropy are so complex that they cannot be handled by one particular organization. So they're going to multiple organizations and asking them to partner and work together to address that same problem. And you need, and surprisingly, we're not particularly collaborative when it comes to working together, because a lot of organizations have struggled to survive, have that scarcity mindset, that has made us feel like we're in competition for donor dollars, for example. So looking for people who are able to bring that strategic partnerships mindset and are able to create relationships across organizations to work on a common goal, I think it's going to be really important. So I would strongly suggest that you look for those kinds of skills in your future leaders when you're looking to hire them. And here's a little bit more about us. We offer free consultations to anyone who's currently thinking about recruiting senior leaders and talented fundraising professionals. So feel free to reach out to us at info@Charity Search Group for a free consultation. We're always available. We work exclusively with the nonprofit sector, and we're the most affordable service that you can find when it comes to generating a competitive pool of applicants for your senior fundraiser and executive leader positions. We have a very thorough screening method, and we present very detailed candidate profiles for your consideration. That saves you time and in the long term money from lost revenue as well. So consider booking a consultation with us, and hopefully we can connect.